All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to Innovation Bay's Wednesday morning event series. I'm your host, as ever, Ian Gardner. I'm a co-founder here at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC with Gelix Ventures. Big call out to the Innovation Bay team, as ever. So Faden Stow is my co-founder in Hobart. We've got Shan, we've got Claire, Sam, CJ, and Alison. We're all working hard to support and connect the startup community across Australia. So also a big thanks to Sam and our other half, Paul, who's equipped me with this fancy Hudley webcam so you can see my entire living room, office, kitchen, all in one. So it's fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. For those that are new, and I'm sure there are a few, I saw the list and there are some, so welcome. We, Innovation Bay, are the longest running community for founders and investors in Australia, and in fact anyone that loves startups. Our mission is really to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond, and we do this through a range of events, programs, and content like this designed to enable you and other founders to connect, learn, and grow. So on that topic, the reason we use this platform, Hopin, is to try and help you connect afterwards. So it's a little bit like being at a physical event, so you can kind of choose where to go and hopefully get to meet some interesting people afterwards. Right now we're on the main stage. We're going to have the panel discussion up here. After that, at 9 o'clock, we'll open the networking, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later, but you can join the breakout rooms. You can get 9 people in video, and you can just lurk and watch if you want and listen, or you can do one-to-one networking, which is a lot of fun. A huge thank you to our sponsors. Innovation Bay would not exist without them, or we couldn't operate without them. So AWS, IAG, Firemark Ventures, Macquarie Bank, and KPMG's High Growth Ventures team, thank you so much for your support. They do some amazing work with the startup ecosystem. All right, today, a pretty exciting topic. Australia's a bit of a world leader in education generally, but online education has been expanding significantly really in the last 5 years. Recent months with COVID is absolute an overdrive. Online learning has transitioned from a nice to have teaching tool to an absolute necessity across every segment that we'll talk about. And the reality is that we and the population just need these innovative learning solutions. So we want to talk about that today. Now we pulled together a panel who are fantastic. So what I might do is invite them back on stage. Let me kill my screen share. And panel, do you want to join me back on stage up here while I start introducing you? So in no particular order, I'll do it in fact in the order of which you joined. So Andrew Barnes is the co-founder and CEO of GO1. He's a Y Combinator alumni. GO1's one of the world's largest onboarding, compliance, and professional development platforms. I think you've raised over 40 million US in Series C funding in March. So that was on top of the other rounds you've done. So, an amazing entrepreneur, amazing business. I think we did an event together a year and a half ago, Andrew, up in Brisbane, where you are. I love the story, so fascinating to hear where you've got to. Interesting stat, usage on your platform tripled in the first 8 weeks of COVID, so that's pretty good. How's it coping now?
Yeah, it's still consistently up.
Good. Hannah Field, principal at Tempus Partners. Tempus and Hannah are backing the next generation of Aussie and New Zealand impossible, quote marks, technology companies. Hannah's got an amazing background. She was actually on the podcast earlier this year, so check that episode out. So welcome, Hannah. Murray Herbst, UTS's first director of entrepreneurship right now. He's done a ton of stuff around the startup ecosystem, so he's a bit of a legend. He's tasked right now with growing the number of student-founded startups coming out of UTS and nurturing the Ultimo Precincts startup environment. Murray's used to be the CEO of Fishburners and was the co-founder at Startup Muster, which was doing the huge, I think it was the largest survey of the Australian startup ecosystem. So great to have you, Murray. Tim, welcome. Tim is in his car in Yamba. He's based in Sydney, but he's up on holidays. He's testing Australia's cellular connectivity. So good on you, Tim. Tim's the founder of Inquisitive. Inquisitive is creating the next generation of learning for students in acquiring, expressing, and sharing knowledge. So it's a bit of a teacher tool. He, before that, was the founder of Mathletics that many of you and certainly your children may have heard of, and Spellodrome. And arguably, in my opinion anyways, one of the leading experts in education tech. I know him well. Gelik's actually invested in Inquisitive, and I can vouch for the fact that he is one of the best founders I've ever come across. So, Tim, delighted to have you in the show. How's the connectivity up in Yamba?
Well, I can hear you, Ian, so that's a good start.
Great, just there. Hopefully nobody in Yamba starts watching Netflix in the next 60 minutes. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to break some of my rules and actually ask a bit of an open-ended question just to try and get a perspective from all of you, because I think it's fascinating. We've got all the different perspectives of online education here. We've got Tim covering education in the classroom, Andrew covering corporate education, and Murray covering, I guess, uni education and development, and Hannah as well. I mean, like, you have invested in education too, so you can give the investor perspective. So, you know, I've tried to put a time cap in this. So, you know, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, just a quick overview of what trends you're seeing in each of your areas. So, Tim, I might start with you. So we'll start at the classroom and sort of go up the stack from there. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, okay. So I've picked 5 of the bigger trends. One, customers making much harder choices on which products they're buying. So I think in our space, in the edtech space, you'll see some big winners, and I actually think you'll see a lot of losers, a lot of people getting frozen out with those harder choices. Obviously, elevation of remote learning as a fundamental need now. It was kind of always there in the background, but now it's seen as fundamental. A really interesting trend is teachers not, expressing quite strongly through the surveying and conversations we've had with them, wanting to maintain a human-first education system, but governments driving digital-first strategies, assessing students first and sending them out into pathways and so on. So there's this real discord between what the grassroots actually want to try and maintain and what governments are driving, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The 4th big trend are governments being much more interventionist in what happens in schools, and I think you'll see a lot of that play out much more significantly over time. And the last one is teachers and students under incredible strain with some serious wellbeing issues. So, perhaps not a conversation we need to go into too much detail today, but they're probably the 5 big trends that I think I'm seeing.
All right, great. That's a fantastic overview. Thank you. Andrew, I might jump to you in terms of the corporates. I mean, what are the big trends that you're seeing and have seen in the last 6 months in particular?
Yeah, I think it's not just the trends over the last 6 months, but if we sort of project forward over the next 5, 10 years, what are the trends that are just going to continue? For us, we're sort of seeing, I suppose, a change to the labour market, where previously, I suppose generations ago, it would not be unusual for someone to have a single job or role that lasted their full career. Whereas now, I think that's certainly an exception. It's much more of a rare situation, and so this need to reskill and upskill between different roles, different sort of pursuits, is itself a bit of a trend. Not only due to sort of increasing mobility in the labour market, but just other factors like automation, where certain roles are no longer as sort of relevant within the local economy. And we're certainly seeing that within Australia and seeing it in other parts of the world. So sort of changes in sort of the labour market needing to reskill and upskill later in life. The second then is that I think in COVID-19 has really accelerated this. Is an increasing realization that geography is no longer a constraint, or at least sort of as much of a market-defining boundary as it used to be. So within the sort of local, and sort of, again, if we think domestically, it's sort of unsurprising that we've got schools in every neighbourhood, that we've got universities in every city, because traditionally, certainly in a higher education setting, we would travel and do education in person. Certainly in the United States, people are attending Harvard and paying full tuition fees without being on site, being on campus. And so when you're no longer sort of required to be on campus, then I think that boundary around geography is starting to go away. And despite, I suppose, some nationalistic policies that governments around the world are doing, I think that trend will continue, that geography will be less of a constraint. And then I think the consequence of those 2 items will be just increasing sort of global competition for best-in-class access to education, similar to what Tim was saying. I think, therefore, there will be players that really outperform, and I think government will start to invest in education later in life. The majority of public spending on training and skilling is between the ages of 5 to 25. But if you need to support people within that sort of later in life stage of reskilling, then I think we'll see government funding starting to shift in that regard as well. So they're the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, great. All right, no, thank you. Murray, let's jump to you. So like, you're covering, I guess, the uni sector. So yeah, what are you seeing? I mean, it must have been tough in the last 6 months for you guys.
Yeah, I'll start by saying it's a terrible year, obviously, and we have to acknowledge all the people that are suffering through this. But that said, there's two good things that I see are happening as a result of all the bad things that are happening. One is in UTS and every other university, there's thousands of academics suddenly rushing to change how they deliver what they do. And things done in a hurry generally won't be done perfectly, but it's wonderful to have that incentive to drive change that otherwise would have taken a lot longer to change. So that's kind of interesting from a university perspective. And the other thing I'm seeing that makes me personally happy is we do a lot of work out in high schools as well. And I'm finding now going out into high schools, there's so much less certainty about I want to be an accountant, or I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be whatever. Suddenly the kind of blinkers are off, and people are more open to what they could be doing for themselves, entrepreneurial things, less traditional career paths. And that kind of wake up call for Australia, I think, is going to be a wonderful thing as well.
Yeah, great. I think, yeah, absolutely. To all that, it would be good to see some more entrepreneurs coming out. Hannah, I think you got this right. I think you were the one that initiated and led the investment that Tempest made in Wand. So yeah, maybe tell us a bit about that and why you think this sector is a good one to invest in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've looked at a few, well, actually quite a few education businesses, and we found the sector starting as a default point to be really challenging. Investing in K through 12, that technology area has really lagged behind the broader market in general. And part of that is just it's hyper fragmented. In Australia, it's fragmented. In the US, it's a complete nightmare. You're dealing with district and state levels and federal levels. There's a real sort of natural cyclical adoption cycle that aligns with budget, and it's just really hard to achieve uniformity and scale. And Maria, I'm sure you can say that it's even hard to achieve uniformity of technology adoption within universities as well. So we've tended to not really find anything that we felt was sort of appropriate from an investment perspective. But when we came across Wand, we were really blown away. And I think key to that is their distribution strategy. So unlike a lot of edtech businesses that we look at that are just trying to block and tackle this acquisition strategy of one school at a time, one school district at a time, Wand is solving that growth by actually acquiring the app developers. So in short, what Wand does is they tackle the technology integration problem that exists in K through 12 schools. So every school has what's called a student information system, or a SIS database, which is typically a legacy system. It's on premise, but it's the single source of truth for student and parent data and classroom information. And to be really optimally used, that database should actually integrate with third-party applications, which is now pervasive across schools. They provide learning outcomes, they provide administrative efficiencies, they help automate teacher workflows. But it's really difficult to actually provide these integrations between these third-party apps and these SIS databases. So what Wand does is they really own the integration layer. They take care of all of the API integrations, and they really solve the problem that's felt by app developers the most. And app developers, because they're technology minded, they really want to solve this problem so they can get back to sort of core development of core product. They're very quick to actually do the integration, and basically Wand enables their success and their growth into schools. So it's a really unique business, and I think the sort of second order benefits of Wand is just facilitating deployment of technology within schools faster. Being able to secure data is a big sort of question mark. Like, there's a lot of personal information floating around that's not being protected, and sort of data and privacy concerns, and one is doing this out of the UK and adhering to GDPR compliance kind of requirements, and all of that stuff is going to roll over to Australia and New Zealand as well. So it's a pretty magical business.
I remember you talking about that in the podcast, and it does sound like an amazing business. So, all right, we'll come back to you in a sec. So, Murray, I want to jump to you on this one. Like, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did a panel at one of our Wednesday morning panels on HR and recruitment, and we had one of the senior recruiters from Google. She's based in Australia, but she's got a global remit. I think she's got 40 recruiters that work under her, just hiring loads and loads of engineers at Google. And also the chief hirer recruiter at Canva. And I asked them about, what's your view on university degrees? And they said, we don't care. So they don't need uni degrees. They just want, can you do the job and do you fit the culture? That seems to be the way they're looking. And I don't know about you, but when I went to uni, I was back in England, in order of going, it was sport, drinking, dating, and then some studying. So it was kind of all about the culture of the place rather than just the pure working. And I think I can't remember who made the point about the Harvard course, but I think it was Andrew. Where do unis fit now?
Okay, nice, easy question to start with. Thanks very much. And I'll answer this question as someone that I started coding when I was 7, dropped out of high school because I thought I was making enough money from the software company I was running that I didn't need it. And now learn about university by working for one rather than because I went to one. So yeah, the exhibit A, that you can have a career without a university degree. But Ian, I think you've nailed it in your description. What matters at a university is not what's in the textbooks. It's the experience you have while you're there. And the social aspects are one thing, but I think more importantly, whatever Canva is looking for should be what a university is delivering to students that aspire to work for Canva. And if a university is only focused on, okay, here's a textbook, here's how we deliver this online instead of face-to-face, those universities won't exist in the future. Instead, they need to focus on what experiences can we give people that are meaningful, that they can't get elsewhere, that we're uniquely able to do with 45,000 students coming in face-to-face on a campus when it's reactivated, and with the partnerships that we're able to generate by being in Sydney, and with this kind of position that we have. And I think to focus on that instead will ultimately result in students, I think, that can get into Canva and other places.
Yeah.
If they want to.
That's a good point. Now, just in all of these, by the way, panel, if you want to jump in and you have strong opinions on these, I mean, I do have a list of questions. And in fact, while I'm here to the audience, this is interactive. If you have a question, please stick it in the chat box on the right of your screen. Tim, I might jump to you and just talk about the classroom experience. I mean, the whole thing's transforming. Like back when I was at school, they were using blackboards and overhead projectors. I don't think they're doing that anymore. It's all smart screens, tablets and computers and smartphones. It's moving pretty fast. I mean, Hannah with Wand is really talked about that. But how are schools and teachers and pupils coping with all this tech change?
Mostly pretty well, actually. Teachers are incredibly adaptable, and I think, as Murray saw, in universities and schools, when they suddenly had to remote teach, they all did it straight up. And we worked with thousands of schools through that period, helping them plan that at breakneck speed. And the quality of the teaching and learning was pretty impressive on a broad scale.
Oops.
In those losers, the losers were those who didn't have good internet connectivity, which is a bit of a comment on myself, I think, at the moment. So I'm mostly pretty well. One of the biggest issues, though, I think, and Hannah alluded to this, is that a lot of edtech products just don't fit the classroom or teacher workflows. And there's a really strong correlation between the countries that have invested most in tech in schools and their performance in the PISA rankings, the Program of International Student Assessment rankings, where they've gone backwards. So greater investment in tech has been a negative for outcomes for students. And it's a really interesting question, why? And I mentioned that a lot of those products are ill-fitting. Well, you can see trends where, for example, one product might have addressed one subject and addressed that subject really, really well. And the commercial drivers for that product have driven them across subjects into multiple subjects. And the quality of those alternative subjects has been absolutely appalling because of that rush to try and broaden the base of the product and the commerciality. And schools then naturally adopt it because it's easier to take a cross-subject product or a much deeper product. And then they only realize the consequences 2 or 3 years later as the results start to play out and outcomes go backwards. So it's a really fascinating trend. And I do think COVID, with schools making harder choices about products, will start to drop away those products that are fit less well. I think companies like Wand will benefit from that need for integration and things working with great interoperability. And I think the final point is, in this first wave of edtech up to now, you could get away with just digitizing what was previously just an analog function. Now, if you just digitize an analog function, you're automatically behind that analog function because it costs more to have the tech, it consumes a lot of time. So if you're going to bring tech into the classroom space or the school space, it's got to be better, faster, lighter, easier, or cheaper. And a lot of what I've seen in this early phase has just been a digitization which consumes a lot of time and naturally takes outcomes backwards. And so I think the big benefit of COVID is it's going to sweep a lot of that away.
Yeah. And actually, Tim, I didn't really give you the chance to explain what Inquisitive actually is and who the audience is.
Look, its job is to simplify what a teacher does by automating and organizing their program for them. Really simple proposition, saves a teacher, we'll probably end up saving them about 300 hours once we've finished building out some of the feature set over the next year. We're up at about 100 hours per teacher per year. So you can imagine on a system level, that is, massive simplification for them. That's weeks of their life back.
Yeah.
And so it's...
and you've got some pretty rapid adoption out there. So there's a lot of people using it now, yeah?
Yeah, I think, look, it's in about 70% of Australian primary schools pretty quickly.
It's astonishing. Anyway, as I said, amazing founder. Every time you send your CEO report through, I'm like, wow, that's impressive. So good on you. Right, next question. Andrew, let me throw to you and talk a little bit more about maybe GO1. I mean, I mentioned in the intro, you've just raised a Series C, $40 million back in March. So probably good timing on that. Well done. So what you've been spending it on, and who are your customers, and how are you managing this whole growth that you're seeing?
Yeah, look, there's nothing like a global health and economic crisis to close out a capital raise. Always a bit of fun. For us, and maybe just a point before I give an introduction around what we do and our audience. When we think of edtech, I think it's very easy to sort of think of iPads in classrooms, Chromebooks, other solutions like that. But I think probably the best invention in edtech is the printing press, is the book. And so I think we can sort of get carried away with what is technology, but I think technology is really anything that can augment how we're providing instruction and basic things like language, books, and whatnot, I think are in many ways so impactful. And then it's going, okay, well, what's the next sort of way of achieving impact? And as Tim was saying, it needs to be better than just those prior versions, as opposed to just a digitized version of it. But to the question around what is GO1, what do? We help organizations and individuals access learning. So we don't create any content ourselves. We aggregate content, so you can think of us similar to a Spotify for education, in the sense that Spotify doesn't create any music themselves, but you subscribe to it and have access to the world's library of music. And so our customers get access to content from Harvard Business Publishing, to Skillsoft, to Thomson Reuters, through to edX, through to say the short book summary service, Blinkist, and hundreds and thousands of other providers, from universities through to boutique training providers. Yeah. And the primary audience has traditionally been corporates, and so the sort of large brands and businesses that we sort of recognise around Australia, such as ANZ or Westpac or Seek or Virgin Australia or Qantas, and increasingly it's a global audience. We've got offices in the US and the UK and seeing strong adoption around the world.
Actually, if I remember, you have offices in Malta. I mean, I remember the last time we spoke properly at the event last year, you'd hired about 200 people in about 6 months. And that was a year and a half ago. So, like, where's your team at now, and how are you managing the whole remoteness of it?
So when we spoke, we were probably at around 200 people in the business. So certainly hadn't hired 200 in 6 months. Maybe had hired 100 or so. And since then, we're close to 250 people globally. We view the opportunity in the space that we're playing in as the global one. So we've got offices around Southeast Asia, around Australia, obviously, the US, the UK, South Africa. So we're pretty geographically dispersed, but really focusing on English language markets right now and helping access training content for small businesses, schools as well. So we've got thousands of schools that use GO1, but it's primarily for teacher professional development as opposed to the sort of core curriculum and sort of SMB and enterprise as well.
Yeah, and very quick, probably yes or no question. Are you happy not spending most of your life in a plane now, or how's that been?
Well, I can say the last couple of months have been fantastic, and my wife sends me she's a school teacher, so she's the real expert on education. She sends me articles whenever Qantas announces that they're delaying international flights again, so I think she's very happy.
All right, cool. Hannah, I might jump to you. So, I mean, 2020 looks like it's going to be a record year for edtech funding. I think the stats we found from last year, which was just, at $1.7 billion went into edtech in 2019, and we're going to eclipse that this year. And again, we've asked you about the trends, but the founders on this call, what advice would you give them if they're out looking for funding? Yeah,
definitely. I think that the number one advice I give is to don't build a business that's relevant to the pandemic only. I think there's definitely opportunities to build value that address an immediate problem. But when the pandemic ends, we're going to enter a new world in which it's very likely that education will be some sort of hybrid model of online and offline. And so if you build something that just solves the immediate issue, your business will become irrelevant, in 3+ years' time, when sort of vaccines are deployed, we sort of get back to some sort of whatever the new normal is. I hate using the buzzword; it's really overused, but and so that would be my sort of number one advice. I think for a lot of the businesses that I've seen, approach Tempus, the challenge we see is that they're built very specifically for ANZ. So I think, to get that sort of venture capital scale and that kind of growth that we're after, we want to be backing businesses that are relevant sort of regardless of the nuances of the education system and the nuances of the kind of assessment systems or districts or sort of how education is deployed in this particular market, because it's very different in the US. And so the things that we're excited about are sort of like core infrastructure technology, companies like GO1, which is around a universal issue of interoperability, which is a term that Tim used. So like seamless exchange of data. Data is held in every school, regardless of sort of what country you're in or what school district you're in. It's a problem everywhere. And so really solving for problems that are universal and aren't just relevant to deployment in Australia, but also deployment in the US or the UK or in Southeast Asia. So just thinking about the relevance of that issue at a global scale. And then the other thing that I would say, and just to kind of hammer home what we love so much about WAND, is that distribution strategy. How do you sort of capital efficiently scale your business without requiring massive massive sales teams and having to sort of do this block and tackle, acquire one school at a time? And what's sort of unique about that distribution strategy? We'd love to hear more about that and sort of how you're thinking about that.
All right, great answer, thank you. Let's take a question from the audience. Murray, I'll focus this on you, but again, everyone, Andrew, I think you might have opinions on this too. It's from Mark Domkins. Hey, Mark. I'll just read it out. Do you already see the Canvas, Atlassians, Googles, etc., guiding, using quote marks, universities to create and optimize the cultural experience? This is to your point earlier, like they should be focusing people on or encouraging unis to give the experience that graduates are going to launch into jobs. So are you working with the big tech companies to craft your courses?
Okay, fantastic question. I was impressed when I got here how much of the experience that students have is actually guided by the companies that they end up going into. So for those students that want that kind of thing, it's already happening. I think it could happen more in the newer tech companies that are out there. I think the PwCs and those kind of companies have much more well-developed graduate programs from what I've seen so far. So I think there's room to improve, and I would encourage if anyone in those companies is not getting the experience that they want, just drop me an email, murray@uts.edu.au, and we'll make it happen, because universities should be doing that, and they do it, but we need to do more always.
But I mean, how often are you chatting to the Canvas of the world?
Canva last week, Atlassian last week,
right.
But for different projects that we're working on. It's tricky when they're large organizations and we're a large organization to match up all the capabilities.
Yeah, again, I did this with Tim. I should probably do it with you as well. I mean, just can you give us a flavor for UTS? I mean, there's a lot of UTS-backed startups coming out. So, like, can you give us some data around what you're seeing at UTS in terms of student entrepreneurs?
Thank you very much. We have 374 student launch startups that we're supporting at the moment under UTS startups. And so they're all technology enabled. They're all doing great things from all faculties. And I thought my job here would be hard. It's actually the easiest job in the world, because these students, I think the ones that UTS attracts are naturally quite entrepreneurial people. And if you say, yeah, you can do that thing, and we'll give you some support in doing it, they can do some incredible things.
Yeah. Anyone else in the panel got an opinion on this? Like, unis working with corporates to craft courses that better suit? Andrew?
I think they've been doing it, as Murray was saying, sort of a good sort of higher education program is one that is sort of mapped towards employment outcomes. It can be done really well, or it can be done really poorly. I saw one example of an MBA program in the United States where they had a unit title, which was basically a sponsored program within the MBA program for Pizza Hut. And so Pizza Hut was paying the university, and is almost sort of propaganda. So I think you want to have the institutionally focused on employment outcomes across a variety of employers, and have employers part of that equation. I think Udacity have done it really well by sort of working on micro-credentials and other sort of programs that are engineered with specific organizations in mind. But I think it is that sort of healthy balance around making sure that you're equipping someone for general success, as opposed to sort of having it as a sponsored offering.
Yeah. Mm. All right, let's roll on with a different question. And thanks for all the questions coming in. We'll definitely pick up on a couple more of them. I just got one more, and then I'll jump to the audience questions. So, I mean, I'll throw this to you first, Hannah. But again, I think everyone should have an opinion. It's around, is there going to be a winner? I mean, everyone's in most sectors are kind of terrified when Amazon comes knocking, and they might come into your sector. They've gone into healthcare. They've gone into delivery. They're doing a lot. So, are they going to come into education? Are they going to come in and take over, schools and unis and corporate education market? Hannah, what do you think? Is there going to be a big winner?
I don't believe there's going to be a big winner, and I think these big giants have been nibbling at the edges of education for quite a while, and I think some of them have sort of been really successful at certain niche areas. I mean, like Google Chromebooks totally blew up in the US. I think it was like 5% penetration in 2010, and then in like 6 years, they have like 60% penetration. So, I mean, that's a wedge of education, right? And education is something like read recently, a $5 trillion US market. Like, it is huge. And to say that there's one winner, clear winner in that sort of size of market, I think there's just going to be multiple competitors. And I think the other thing to remember is that sort of these big giants, as much as we sort of applaud them for being like the world's innovators, it's actually really hard to develop new technology within a giant enterprise like that. And I think some areas will be like really core competencies for them, and they will always smash it. Apple will always be amazing at hardware for the foreseeable future. Will be amazing at hardware. Google's obviously done a great job with Google Apps for Education and sort of reskinning the professional sort of services within education. But sort of those niche opportunities where sort of founders come with unique domain insight into a problem, and we see that's being pervasive, have the opportunity to build what we might think is niche value, but it becomes enormous value when replicated across entire large markets. And I actually think that what we'll see more of is probably acquisition of talent, acquisition of IP. And so these businesses, rather than trying to compete with the Wands of the world, they eventually say, actually, Wand is super valuable. It augments the value that we're driving for schools with, say, Google Apps for Education. They become an acquisition target instead. So I think that trend is more likely to happen rather than trying to tackle a bunch of different niche technology issues within a behemoth organization. So that's kind of my view of that.
Anyone else got a view on this one?
Maybe just sort of playing off what Hannah was saying, I think it sounds like, at least say for example, the Wand example, it sounds like there's network effects there, and so therefore it's likely that it'll be more. I think it's really between Wand and Clever, the US sort of equivalent, to go, how can they provide that sort of layer across schools? But because of the network effects, I think to Ian's point, it is more likely in my mind that there will be companies that are much more pervasive and broad. And then I think, Hannah, you're right. I think it will be an area that Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple look really closely at. And a lot of those businesses, even if we think of Android, the mobile operating system, weren't internally developed at Google. They were acquisitions, but we now think of them as Google products. And so maybe one day in the future, the fact that Google owns all the classroom data, just as like they own sort of everything in the mobile world except for iPhone, may end up being something that's run by Google, but was originally created by Wand once upon a time.
Yeah. Tim, in your intro, you mentioned COVID having a sort of deleterious or a bad effect on teachers and students. I mean, I think it's probably worth digging into that, and then just, I just want to touch on the whole COVID question because it's impacted everyone here. So, I mean, how is it going for schools with the COVID crisis right now?
Well, from a functional perspective, I think it's helped improve the way schools operate. A lot of their teaching and learning delivery, amazingly, faster, efficient. But the human toll has been the big one, because kids and teachers have lost that connect with each other, that human first connection, where then technology plays a supporting role. And it hasn't been discussed a lot in the media because there's sort of the general discussion of COVID. And in many respects, I think we're all very much over that constant news about COVID.
Yeah.
But if you have a look on social media, there's been all these really negative ramifications, all right across the world, particularly for kids and teenagers.
And this is around their mental health?
Yeah, very much so.
Right.
And because we live in a human-first world. So it's a really interesting question for edtech entrepreneurs, because do you build products that are digital first, assign a pathway to a kid? Is their first port of call the technology component, or is it the teacher? What role does technology play? Does it automate the other functions, or does it automate that entry point, the digital first point? And it's going to be fascinating to see what plays out in this. I certainly have my own views on it, Ian, and But yeah, so there's a real discord, and government's really, it's going to be an interesting time because in many respects, I think governments in their intervention are going to try and control a lot of the data of what happens in schools. They're going to try and amass that data and use that data. And that's going to bring an interesting interplay between governments and the big players, Amazon, Google, and so on, as to who houses, owns, and maintains that data.
And do you trust the government to make good decisions based off that data?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, interestingly, from my own micro perspective in the businesses that I've worked with, we've got the challenge that we have to host all of the data in country now. And that means if you're using Salesforce or Amazon, you've got to have everything housed in certain jurisdictions. An incredibly challenging thing to do. And you're going to see a lot more of that because of all the issues around data sovereignty and privacy and security. And so your ability to architect to achieve those things are going to be fundamental if you want to have that global success. So, so many ramifications that are yet to play out. But for me, the big one is that, is it a human first education experience or is it a digital first with humans around the side of it? And yeah, and government policy is very hard driving towards that digital first, actually. And I don't think that's what teachers want.
Yeah. Murray?
Murray, you're going to say?
Just a quick point to add on to that. I think, and this might be slightly controversial, but I think one of the main values in high schools and universities and other places where people are educated is the monopoly on attention that they have. And they can use that monopoly on attention to expose people to different things that prepare them better for their future lives. And when you throw COVID into that equation and people are at home on little laptops or engaged and stressed and distracted, it's going to work less well. I feel better that this won't last forever. And when we come back, there's chances to look at how we do things differently. But I always think that the technology side of things will be something that takes that monopoly on attention and makes it more effective at preparing people over time. But I think people forget about that as a value proposition of these schools.
Yeah. All right, let's take another question from the audience. So Beck McIntosh, welcome Beck. Andrew, you mentioned older learners, so such as me, I guess. I think I'm the oldest here. What does the panel think about edtech opportunities to this group in terms of the need to upskill and an increase in career transitions? People changing jobs more often.
I'm happy to kick it off if that helps.
Yep.
Yeah, so what I was sort of referencing was probably two factors. One, a belief that we, as a society, as individuals, will need to learn new skills over time, which shouldn't be surprising, but that's sort of belief number one. And the second is when you look at spending on education, there's a graph that one of our investors, Andrew Larson, shared with us. He's sort of very focused on the edtech space, and it shows basically all of the public and private funding in education is concentrated for individuals between the ages of 5 and 25 years of age. And so if we go, well, we have this belief that it's important to learn new skills later in life. We're all sort of speaking on this panel. We can sort of understand mathematics, we can sort of read and write. Those skills have such a huge impact later in life, but surely skills like time management, mental health awareness, the ability to work within a group and manage a team, those skills should also be incredibly useful and help us later in life. And those skills we should continue to invest in and learn over time. I think there's a huge need for concentrating on how do we equip people throughout their working lives with those new skills, and I think that currently is a bit of a gap, and it's something that we're focusing on. But I think there's so much work that could be done in that space.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in there? Hannah, was that you?
Yeah, just adding to what Andrew's saying, I think touching on a lot of like the kind of the sort of the softer skills within environments, but also just looking at at the moment, like huge industries have been sunk. And millions of people are out of work and they have to choose something different. Like it's just not possible to continue doing what they're doing today. And this is a huge travesty at a global level. And the OECD recently published that something like 1 billion people are going to have jobs that fundamentally change in the next decade. So what are the options for people like that? And these aren't people who are grads or can sort of pivot in college. They're people that are our age and have to choose another option. And so I think I haven't seen so much in Australia and New Zealand, but certainly in the US and other markets in Southeast Asia, companies that are really focused on that sort of the adult learner and reskilling and how do we map out the skills shortage that exists in healthcare, childcare education, accounting, like some of these skills that we sort of assume are just fundamental to our society, but just we're not really focusing people in those directions to fill that shortage. And how do we reskill people who are in a job today that may not exist in 5 or 10 years and point them in the right direction?
Yeah.
So I think there's can be better alignment in that. So I think that's kind of an area I'm thinking a lot about.
Yeah, cool. I mean, to that point, I mean, ultimately, education is being utterly democratized, if that's the right word. So it's available everywhere, anywhere you got internet, which is, the vast majority of the world's population now, and it's becoming cheaper. So you can go and tune into a Stanford lecture or Harvard or Google. I mean, they're all putting this stuff out there. I mean, this is only a good thing, isn't it? I mean, there might be some threats to the traditional form. I mean, we touched on this before, Murray, but the threat in terms of your big fees from international students should, in theory, be offset by more people wanting an education from, even if it is a bit cheaper. So, Murray, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think of democratization of this?
I think it's a given. We live in 2020. The availability of education online through different platforms, through overseas platforms, is so ubiquitous and good that I think it's already there. It's been solved. What's not been solved is people's desire for it, guidance through it, the recognition of it, and I think there's room to improve in those areas. I think also, if you look at the Australian education landscape, the growth opportunity is in post-grad kind of lifetime learning. So that outplacement alternatives and re-education of people. And I think it's interesting to look at what that looks like and what is recognized for people that are doing kind of large career transitions. It reminds me of something I saw, like Startup Muster had a feature where it would introduce particular investors and accelerators to startups that were relevant. And it would use really complicated matching criteria. And if you're a startup, you would see, okay, this accelerator is looking for your exact kind of startup. And the feature worked well mathematically, but people didn't engage with it because no one cared what Startup Muster thought. And so there's another problem to solve, that, yeah, we've got education all over the place, but what is driving people to it? What is the kind of authoritative, trustworthy thing that people say, yes, everyone else is doing that thing, that's recognized as preparing people for this position that I want, and I'm going to go and do that thing. So I think that will take some time to build up.
Yeah. Tim, any thoughts from you around this? Is there going to be a change in classroom education as it becomes democratized in this sense?
Yeah, it's really going to take governments. The really strange thing is, on this democratizing question, which I'm a very, very big believer in, is that it's more inequitable now in school education than ever. And just take the Australian context. 50 years ago, Australian education in K-12 was incredibly equitable. You could get incredible standard teaching and learning anywhere, in any small school, anywhere. And yet now there's this massive gap, huge gap that's never been there before. And it's grown more with technology. So governments have a really big role to play as edtech providers too, to actually achieve that level of democratization. So the availability is there, but it's not being consumed, and the gap's widening. So yeah, really challenging era, strangely enough.
I mean, there's a linked question to this, or a point that came in from Eddie Blass, just around national qualifications. So, if we do have this democratization, then everyone's going to be qualified in theory. So does qualifications lose their currency? And does this remove the role of regulators, was the other point he's making. So Andrew, I mean, I'll maybe talk to you because, you know, people are, I guess, using GO1 in order to get qualification of some kind. But yeah, what's your thought on this one?
We actually concentrate much more on short courses as opposed to sort of formal qualifications. I think there is there's probably a deeper philosophical question of going, imagine we could sort of just improve the education outcomes for everyone in the country. Is it a zero-sum game? Is there the same sort of number of jobs in the labour market, and so therefore does it sort of improve outcomes? I'm much more optimistic than that. I think if you can sort of increase capability, then new opportunities emerge, and so I think that sort of democratization of access to education, the sort of ability to access and achieve sort of greater qualifications, be them formal qualifications or other sort of industry recognized sort of demonstrations of competency, I think is going to be such an important part of the future.
Yeah. All right, we're getting we've got about 5 minutes left. So if you've got any more final questions from the audience, just chuck them in. I might ask Murray a question, but I think Hannah, because I'll be interested in your take as well. I mean, UTS is a startup program that talks about 350 plus, student launched enterprises that you're covering. You've got Incubate at the Sydney Uni. You've got the 10X program at UNSW. Wollongong's got one. Newcastle. Every uni has some form of startup program or accelerator in a sense. I mean, so any advice for the founders out there? Should they apply to one of these? What are the criteria? Yeah, let me throw that to you.
Yes. In a word.
What are the benefits?
So UTS startups will support anyone that has a UTS student on the founding team or someone who has been a student in the last 12 months. So if you can find a student, add them to your founding team, come on down, we'll support you. But the main thing is, so I spent a bit of time looking at 1,000 startups that had taken part in Startup Muster. And I did this like 3 months ago and looked at if I could find an obvious reason for them to struggle during COVID. And the result of that was 41% of those startups, I could find really obvious reasons for them not to be viable during COVID. Which was much higher than I was expecting. And I think JobKeeper is masking a lot of the attrition of these startups. And I think the willingness of founders to say, I've stopped working on this, is also a factor that's masking a lot of the startups that aren't really functioning at the moment as well. So I think across Australia, we are going to see attrition of startups like we've never seen before. And yeah, there's new opportunities that didn't exist before, but it's also a risky environment, and people's risk tolerance might stop them from doing something that in more prosperous times they might otherwise have a shot at. So if you are a founder doing something, for the love of God, do it. We need you persevering and being the people that are kind of have enough grit and hard work and persistence to realize the opportunities that other people have fallen away and not pursued. So that's my message for you. If you are doing it, keep doing it. If you're not doing it, think about doing it.
Yeah. Hannah, I mean, do you find these uni programs a good source of talent and opportunities for investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, honestly, I can't say it better than Murray from the source of truth coming from the university perspective. And we may not necessarily invest directly from those businesses, but I think it is phenomenal training ground for founders. Particularly founders who are starting earlier, like providing avenues for creativity and innovation in a way that hasn't existed before, and doing it in a safe and structured environment that's not super cost effective. They're not having to pay for rent and sort of all these overheads that are barriers to entry for founders who really want to sort of fulfill their life's vision and build something they've always dreamed of building. So we may not go straight in there and sort of back those university teams, but they're laying the groundwork for future companies, and that's what we're really excited about. And we could never be against that idea. I think more of that is better. And to Murray's point also, like, I think it's going to be an interesting time in the next year or two. Like, I agree that JobKeepers is definitely propping up a number of zombie businesses that aren't probably going to exist when JobKeeper ends.
Yeah.
But I would say the optimistic side of that is if you sort of reflect on the GFC and the number of valuable businesses that were built during that time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable value that has been created. And from an employment perspective, from a GDP perspective. And so from our view, we're very optimistic about this time at the same time. So.
All right, look, we're heading towards the end, so we might get the final word from the two founders. So, I mean, Andrew, you went through Y Combinator, so I know it's not a uni-backed accelerator, but it's got many of the same benefits in terms of the clustering and the mentoring and the alumni. Any insights from your experience of going through an accelerator? Should the founders in the call be doing that?
So I think we're very, very fortunate being able to go through Y Combinator. Other companies that have gone through it, like Airbnb, Stripe, Dropbox, are now household names. So it was sort of a pinch ourselves moment when we got through. I think it really depends on what is driving the decision to go through an accelerator. And probably the key that I'd point out is there is no silver bullet. There is no sort of secret sauce that suddenly by getting into any accelerator, even Y Combinator, they don't solve the problems for you. That's your job as the founder to work out how to run a successful business. But whether it's a university accelerator and also had prior to YC gone through UQ, University of Queensland's accelerator with a separate business, or whether it's a global accelerator like Y Combinator, there's a couple of things that it does do, and it creates an artificial deadline. It creates a community where you can sort of go to for support and networking, and it's also signaling. I think that's at the end of the day, one of the functions that it provides is to then be able to say, look, we were part of the 1 or 2% that were picked by this particular group, whether it's YC or UTS or someone else, to say, look, I'm part of this group, and it's good signaling to attract employees, attract customers, and then hopefully build a successful business. Yeah.
And Tim, I'll leave the last word with you. I mean, like, your founder journey is quite unique. Not the typical one of the sort of around the startup ecosystem. So any tips or insights, what have you learned from doing what you've done, and what would you say to the founders in the call?
If you find a problem that's worthwhile solving, it's the most deeply satisfying thing to do. It takes a decade to solve a problem well. It really does. And it gets more and more satisfying the deeper you go into solving the problem. And so for me, it's such a natural thing to go and start a company. Like, it just seems so natural to do that. You've got this gift and this opportunity. So I would be very encouraging of anyone wanting to have a crack at solving something. And part of that is solve it originally in your own way. Don't try and merely copy some other technology or some part of it and do it slightly better. Solve the problem really well in your own way. And then you'll be additive to everything rather than just another competing product.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end. So we are out of time. So Murray, Tim, Hannah, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Look, hang around if you can. No requirement, but I'm going to kick you off stage so I can just do a wrap up and then get to the networking. So skedaddle.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
See you in a sec. I'm just going to go and share my screen. Let me just click this, and let me just do a quick wrap up of what we're doing. So yeah, so we are going to do some networking. So the sessions, which you'll see, is for the group conversations, and the networking is just the one-on-one. So it's pretty obvious. Fiddle around with it, but please do hang around. It's a lot of fun. Next week, we've got a great event. We've got Catherine McConnell, Peter James, and Kajal from KPMG talking about boards and how you should build your best board. So all of these are highly experienced people around that topic. So, might sound a bit dry, but it's super important, especially as you start scaling. Couple of other things. So the applications for Accelerate 2020 are closing this weekend. So you don't need to be in fintech to apply, but is your startup helping younger Australians, is the sort of overall question they're asking. Some really good benefits for applying. So check it out at that link that you see there. 4 days left as of today, which is Wednesday the 23rd. So I'm just saying that in case you're watching this on YouTube. So yeah, go and check it out. I think finally, 2 new episodes just came out this week of the podcast, Open the Pod Bay Doors. We do a news special. So we had Andrea Gardner, who I know very well, Alex Macaulay, and Olympia Yargar. So fantastic. A lot of good insights in that one. So check it out. And yeah, I had the podcast I did with Dave Walsh from CIM. Got some really good feedback. Dave's a very passionate Irishman solving a big problem in a very unique way. So check that one out. Thanks again to our national sponsors. So Macquarie, KPMG, AWS, and IAG Pharmark. Right, I am going to switch my slides off and say thank you. Oh, my dog's got in the shot here, so she's saying thank you too. So look, thanks everyone. Hang around for the networking. I'm going to jump out and do that as well. So we'll see you there.